A dog steals all the neighbors' kittens, again and again, and his owner can't believe what's happening. Every night, the hound sneaks across the fence, dragging home tiny mewing kittens one by one. At first it looks like madness, or maybe something darker. The neighbor's furious, threatening to have the dog taken away. But when the owner finally calls 911, thinking his dog's gone too far, the truth hits harder than anyone expects. Because this isn't about stolen kittens. It's about what the dog was trying to save them from. Beneath the perfect neighborhood, something dangerous is hiding. Chemicals, secrets, lies, and a man who's about to discover that the only creature telling the truth doesn't even speak. What made this loyal dog risk everything? What was really happening behind that locked pool house? And when the truth comes out, who will end up saving whom? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Carver Holt's small repair yard, where scattered engine parts caught the golden light like forgotten treasures. He wiped his oil-stained hands on a rag, surveying the day's work with quiet satisfaction. The familiar scent of motor oil and cut grass hung in the air, a comfort he'd grown to appreciate in his solitary life. "Thatch," he called out, realizing he hadn't seen his faithful hound in the past hour. Usually the dog stayed close, content to doze in the patch of shade near the workshop door. A rustling from the side of the house drew his attention. Thatch emerged from behind the hydrangea bushes, but something was different about his usual steady gait. The big golden-brown hound moved carefully, his head held at an odd angle. "What have you got there, boy?" Carver's voice carried a note of concern. In all the years since his wife's passing, Thatch had never been one to cause trouble. The dog was known throughout the neighborhood for his gentle nature, more likely to help a fallen bird than harm it. Thatch approached slowly, and Carver's eyes widened as he made out a small, wriggling bundle in the dog's mouth. A soft, high-pitched mewing sound carried on the evening breeze. "Easy now," Carver said, kneeling down. "Let's see what you found." Thatch carefully deposited his cargo into Carver's outstretched hands. A tiny kitten, no more than a few weeks old, lay trembling in his palm. Its gray fur was ruffled but unharmed, and bright blue eyes stared up at him with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Lord above," Carver muttered, examining the kitten for injuries. Finding none, he glanced at Thatch, who sat watching with those intelligent amber eyes of his. "Where'd you get this little one from?" The kitten mewed again, a sound that seemed to stir something in Carver's chest. He hadn't held anything so small and vulnerable since, well, he pushed that thought aside. The important thing now was figuring out where this kitten belonged. A flash of memory struck him. He'd seen Lorraine Kincaid, his neighbor 2 houses down, carrying cat supplies into her garage last week. She'd always been particular about her property, her pristine lawn a stark contrast to his practical lived-in yard. If this kitten belonged to her, she'd want it back right away. "Come on, Thatch," he said, rising carefully with the kitten cradled against his chest. "We'd better sort this out." The walk to Lorraine's house was short, but Carver felt a growing unease with each step. Thatch padded alongside him, unusually tense. The dog's behavior puzzled him. This wasn't like his old friend at all. Lorraine's house stood like a magazine cover come to life, with perfectly trimmed shrubs and not a blade of grass out of place. Her gleaming realtor's car sat in the driveway, suggesting she was home. Carver approached the front door, noting how the kitten had settled quietly in his hands. He pressed the doorbell, hearing its muffled chime echo inside. After a moment, quick footsteps approached, and the door swung open to reveal Lorraine Kincaid, impeccably dressed despite the late hour, her blonde hair styled just so. "Carver?" Her perfectly shaped eyebrows rose in surprise, then drew together as she spotted what he was holding. "What are you doing here?" "Evening, Lorraine," he said, keeping his voice friendly but neutral. "I believe Thatch found something that belongs to you." He held out the kitten gently. The change in Lorraine's expression was immediate and startling. Her face hardened, eyes flashing with an anger that seemed out of proportion to the situation. "Your dog took that kitten?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to make the little creature flinch in Carver's hands. "He brought it home just now," Carver explained, increasingly confused by her reaction. "I remembered seeing you with cat supplies last week, so I figured—" "That mutt of yours had better stay away from my property," Lorraine cut him off, snatching the kitten from his hands. The little thing squealed in protest. "If I catch him anywhere near here again, I'll call animal control so fast your head will spin." Carver felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. "Thatch has never caused any trouble before. If something's wrong—" "The only thing wrong here is your inability to control your dog," Lorraine snapped. "Keep him chained up if you have to, but if I see him anywhere near my garage again, you'll regret it." She stepped back, clutching the kitten. "And Carver, mind your own business." The door slammed shut with enough force to rattle the decorative wreath hanging on it. Carver stood there for a moment, stunned by the encounter. He looked down at Thatch, who met his gaze with those knowing amber eyes. "Something's not right here, boy," he murmured as they walked back home. The sunset had deepened to purple, but the unease in his gut had nothing to do with the gathering darkness. Thatch, the gentlest dog he'd known in all his years of keeping hounds, taking a kitten? And Lorraine's reaction, that wasn't simple anger over a stolen pet. That was something else entirely. Back in his workshop, Carver settled into his old chair, Thatch laying his head on his knee. He ran his rough hands over the dog's ears, thinking. In the 5 years since losing Sarah, he'd kept to himself, finding peace in the simple routine of fixing engines and living quietly. But that peace felt disturbed now, like ripples spreading across still water. "What did you find out there, old friend?" he asked softly. Thatch's tail thumped once against the floor, but his eyes remained fixed on the garage door, as if he could see through it to something beyond. The evening settled around them, but Carver's mind kept returning to the strange encounter. The fury in Lorraine's eyes, the way she'd grabbed the kitten, her threat about animal control, none of it added up. Thatch had never shown aggression toward anything in his life. In fact, he'd always had a particular softness for small, helpless creatures. He remembered how Sarah used to say that dogs could sense things humans missed, that their instincts were worth paying attention to. "They're simpler than us," she'd say, "but sometimes that means they see clearer." Looking at Thatch now, watching the steady rise and fall of his breathing, Carver couldn't shake the feeling that his dog had stumbled onto something important, something that Lorraine Kincaid was desperate to keep hidden. The repair yard outside fell into shadow as night crept in, but instead of his usual evening routine, Carver sat thinking. The gentle tick of cooling engines and the distant song of crickets filled the air, familiar sounds that had always brought comfort. Tonight, though, they seemed to carry a question. What exactly had started with Thatch's strange behavior, and where would it lead? He had always been content to let the world pass by his workshop door, finding all he needed in the honest work of fixing what was broken. But sometimes, he realized, things that needed fixing weren't made of metal and wire. Sometimes they were more complicated than that, and ignoring them didn't make them right. The kitten's tiny mews echoed in his memory, along with the fear in its eyes when Lorraine had grabbed it. Thatch shifted at his feet, letting out a small whine, and Carver knew this wasn't over. Whatever his gentle hound had discovered, it wouldn't stay hidden for long. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with dew sparkling on the repair yard's scattered parts. Carver stepped onto his front porch, coffee mug in hand, and nearly tripped over a tiny bundle of fur curled up on his welcome mat. Another kitten, this one gray with white paws, looking up at him with desperate blue eyes. "Thatch?" Carver called out, but his hound was already there, tail wagging slowly as he nosed the kitten. The dog's expression seemed almost proud. Carver set his mug down and knelt to examine the trembling creature. It couldn't have been more than 4 weeks old, far too young to be away from its mother. As he cradled it, he noticed an odd, chemical smell clinging to its fur. Before he could process this discovery, Thatch's ears perked up. The hound trotted purposefully toward the shed, looking back at Carver expectantly. With the gray kitten tucked safely in one hand, Carver followed. Behind his rusting lawnmower, curled up in an old drop-cloth, lay a third kitten, orange and white, mewing weakly. "What in the world?" Carver muttered, gathering this one up too. It had the same sharp, unfamiliar scent as the first. The morning unfolded like a strange dream. Every time Carver turned around, Thatch appeared with another kitten, from under bushes, behind the garage, even one that had somehow ended up in an empty 5-gallon bucket. By mid-afternoon, his laundry room housed 8 tiny, frightened kittens. By nightfall, the count had reached 10. He'd attempted to set up makeshift beds using old towels and cardboard boxes, but the kittens were clearly in distress. Several had trouble breathing, taking shallow, rapid breaths that made their tiny sides heave. Their fur felt sticky and matted, despite their young age. Overwhelmed, Carver did something he rarely did. He asked for help. He called the local veterinary clinic where he'd taken Thatch for his shots. "Valley Creek Veterinary, this is Greer," a warm voice answered. "This is Carver Holt," he said, realizing he was nervously pacing his kitchen. "I've got a situation with some kittens." 20 minutes later, Greer Malloy's dusty pickup truck pulled into his driveway. She stepped out carrying a large medical bag, her copper-blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Carver had seen her around town but never spoken to her at length. Now, watching her efficient movements as she assessed the situation, he wished he had. "10 kittens, you said?" she asked, following him to the laundry room. "All found today?" Her eyes widened as she took in the scene. "Oh my goodness." She set her bag down and immediately began examining the nearest kitten, her gentle hands moving with practiced care. "They're all about the same age, 3 to 4 weeks. They should still be nursing." She paused, frowning as she sniffed one kitten's fur. "What's this smell?" "I noticed that too," Carver said, watching as she examined each kitten in turn. "It's on all of them." Greer's frown deepened as she checked their breathing and gums. 2 of them are showing respiratory distress, and this residue on their fur. She looked up at him, her green eyes serious. "This isn't normal, Carver. These kittens have been exposed to something. Cleaning chemicals, maybe, or some kind of industrial solution." Thatch whined from the doorway, and Greer turned to him with a gentle smile. "You've been rescuing them, haven't you, boy?" She looked back at Carver. "Where is he finding them?" Carver ran a hand through his hair. "I think they're coming from Lorraine Kincaid's property. Thatch brought one home yesterday, and when I tried to return it..." He described Lorraine's strange reaction. "Lorraine?" Greer's expression changed. "I've heard rumors about her running some kind of breeding operation, but nothing concrete. The clinic never sees any animals from her, which is odd considering how many people say they've bought kittens from her." She began pulling supplies from her bag. syringes, small bottles, a stethoscope. These little ones need help. I'll start them on fluids and something to help their breathing, but we need to figure out what they were exposed to. For the next hour, they worked together, Greer showing Carver how to hold each kitten as she administered treatments. She taught him how to mix formula and demonstrated proper bottle feeding techniques. Throughout it all, Thatch watched attentively from his post by the door. "You'll need to feed them every 2 to 3 hours, Greer explained, writing down instructions. "Even through the night. I can come by tomorrow to check on them, but—" She hesitated, then met his eyes directly. "Carver, something's wrong here. These kittens didn't just wander away from their mother. They've been kept in unsafe conditions, exposed to harmful substances. And if Thatch is finding this many—" "There could be more," Carver finished, the realization settling heavily in his chest. He thought about Lorraine's defensive anger, her threat about animal control. "You think she's running some kind of illegal operation?" "I think," Greer said carefully, "that Thatch is trying to tell us something important." She reached down to scratch behind the hound's ears. "Dogs have better instincts than we do sometimes. If he's going out of his way to rescue these kittens, there's a reason." As if in agreement, Thatch's tail thumped against the floor. The sound echoed in the small laundry room, mixing with the tiny mews of the kittens and the hum of the dryer Carver had turned on to help warm them. "I'll get you more supplies," Greer said, packing up her bag. "And Carver? Thank you for calling me. Most people would have just turned a blind eye." He walked her to her truck, the evening air cool against his face. Before she got in, she turned back. "Whatever's happening at Lorraine's property, it isn't right. These kittens are evidence of that. We need to figure out what's going on before more animals get hurt." Carver nodded, watching as she drove away. Back inside, he found Thatch lying beside the makeshift kitten nursery, his gentle eyes fixed on the tiny creatures he'd spent all day rescuing. One by one, they were falling asleep. They're breathing easier now thanks to Greer's treatment. The chemical smell still lingered, though, a constant reminder that these weren't just strays. They were victims of something darker. As Carver settled in for what would be a long night of feeding schedules, he couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet life was about to become considerably less peaceful. The sharp rap of knuckles on his front door made Carver jump. He'd just finished the 2 o'clock feeding, and his eyes felt grainy from lack of sleep. Thatch's head snapped up, a low rumble building in his chest. Through the window, Carver saw 3 figures on his porch. Lorraine Kincaid in a crisp white pantsuit, a tall man with tattooed forearms he didn't recognize, and Kendrick Stowe, the HOA president, looking officious in his usual gray suit. "Coming," Carver called, his stomach tightening. He opened the door, keeping one foot behind it to block Thatch, who was still growling softly. "Mr. Holt," Kendrick said, his voice clipped and formal, "we need to discuss a serious matter concerning your dog and the theft of Ms. Kincaid's show kittens." Lorraine stepped forward, her perfectly made-up face a mask of distress. "How dare you? Those are valuable Persian mix kittens. I have buyers waiting." The man beside her, must be the boyfriend Greer had mentioned, cracked his knuckles. "Name's Zeke Drummond," he said, his voice carrying an edge of threat. "I helped build those special enclosures for Lorraine's breeding program. Cost a pretty penny, too." "Breeding program?" Carver frowned. "I thought you said they were strays when I brought the first one back." "They most certainly are not strays," Lorraine snapped. "They're worth $500 each, and your mutt has been stealing them." Kendrick cleared his throat. "As HOA president, I cannot allow this kind of criminal behavior in our community. Ms. Kincaid runs a legitimate business from her home." "Licensed?" Carver interrupted quietly. Lorraine's face flushed. "That's none of your concern. I want my kittens back now, or I'm calling animal control. That dog is dangerous. Thatch has never hurt anyone, Carver protested. He's the gentlest. A gentle dog doesn't steal kittens, Zeke cut in, taking a step closer. Maybe we should have a look around. Make sure you haven't got any more of them hidden away. Thatch's growl grew louder. Carver had never heard that sound from him before, not in all their years together. I've already called the authorities, Lorraine announced, holding up her phone. They're on their way. Either you return my property willingly, or we'll have them searched for and seized. Carver's mind raced. The kittens were sick. Greer had confirmed it. Whatever conditions they'd been kept in had exposed them to harmful chemicals. But he had no proof, and Lorraine clearly had influence with the HOA. Kendrick was already pulling out a thick binder of regulations. Section 8, Paragraph 3 clearly states that any animal causing disturbance or damage to property. Fine, Carver interrupted. I'll get them. He turned toward the laundry room, Thatch padding anxiously beside him. The kittens were just starting to wake up, their tiny bodies warm in the nest of towels he and Greer had made. As he began gathering them into a box, Thatch suddenly grabbed one, the smallest, weakest one, and backed away. Thatch, Carver said firmly, drop it. But the dog held firm, amber eyes locked on his owner's face. When Carver reached for the kitten, Thatch growled, not aggressively, but with absolute conviction. In all their years together, through hunting and training and companionship, Thatch had never once refused a command. What's taking so long? Lorraine's voice carried down the hallway. Zeke, go help him. Heavy footsteps approached. Thatch's growl deepened, and he backed further away with the kitten. Well, well, Zeke drawled from the doorway. Looks like the mutt's not so well trained after all. Carver stepped between Thatch and Zeke. He's protecting it. From what? Lorraine appeared behind Zeke, her face twisting with anger. Those are my kittens, my property. They're sick, Carver said quietly. Whatever you're exposing them to, you have no right to make accusations, Kendrick cut in smoothly. Ms. Kincaid is a respected member of this community. Perhaps if you attended HOA meetings instead of hiding away in your garage. A car door slammed outside. Through the window, Carver saw an animal control van pulling up. Last chance, Lorraine said sweetly. Give me all the kittens, or I'll have that dog taken away. You know what they do to animals that show aggressive tendencies? Carver looked at Thatch, still holding the tiny kitten with impossible gentleness, despite his protective stance. He thought about Greer's words about instincts, about doing what's right. The law might be on Lorraine's side, but that didn't make it right. Ma'am? A new voice called from the front door. Animal control. We received a report about a dangerous dog? Carver felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had always kept to himself, avoided trouble, followed the rules. But as he watched Thatch standing his ground, protecting something small and helpless against those who would harm it, he knew he couldn't back down. If you want to file a report, he called out, you should probably investigate the chemical exposure these kittens have suffered. A vet tech has already documented their condition. Lorraine's face went white, then red. You have no proof. Actually, Carver continued, his voice growing stronger, you might want to check those special enclosures Mr. Drummond built. I'm sure the Humane Society would be very interested in your unlicensed breeding operation. You're making a mistake, Kendrick warned, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. The HOA board will hear about this. Good, Carver said. They can hear about all of it, including why a supposedly gentle dog would risk everything to save these kittens. Thatch's tail wagged once, the tiny kitten still secure in his mouth. The animal control officer appeared in the hallway, taking in the scene with professional interest. Would someone like to explain what's really going on here? She asked, pulling out a notebook. Lorraine grabbed Zeke's arm. We're leaving. This isn't over, Holt. No, Carver agreed quietly. watching them retreat. I don't suppose it is. As their angry voices faded down the driveway, Carver knelt beside Thatch, who finally released the kitten into his hands. It was shaking slightly, but alive, fighting, just like all the others. "Sir?" The animal control officer stepped forward. "I'm going to need a statement about these allegations of chemical exposure and unlicensed breeding." Carver nodded, cradling the tiny kitten. "Yes," he said. "I suppose you will." The summer night wrapped around Carver's small house like a warm blanket, but sleep wouldn't come. He lay in bed, listening to the steady tick of the ceiling fan and Thatch's restless movements downstairs. After the confrontation earlier that day, his mind kept spinning with worries about what Lorraine might do next. A low whine from below made him sit up. "Thatch?" he called out softly. The scratching sound of dog nails on hardwood grew more intense. Carver swung his legs out of bed and padded downstairs in his worn flannel pajamas. In the dim light from the kitchen window, he found Thatch pacing between the back door and the fence line, his usual calm demeanor replaced by obvious distress. "What's wrong, boy?" Carver asked, reaching for the flashlight he kept by the back door. The moment he opened it, Thatch bolted into the yard, making a beeline for the fence that separated their property from Lorraine's. The night air felt heavy with humidity, but there was something else. A sharp, chemical smell that made Carver's nose wrinkle. He followed Thatch, sweeping the flashlight beam across the ground. The dog stood at the fence, pawing at the wood and whining with increasing urgency. "Easy there," Carver murmured, but Thatch wouldn't settle. He kept looking back at Carver, then toward Lorraine's property, particularly the pool house where she kept her special breeding program. Something about that chemical smell nagged at Carver's mind. He aimed the flashlight over the fence, its beam cutting through the darkness. The pool house windows were dark, but parked nearby was a large white truck he'd never seen before. The logo on its side made his heart skip. Porter's Professional Fumigation Services. "Oh no," he whispered. Thatch's whining grew more desperate. Carver hurried back inside, hands shaking slightly as he dialed Greer's number. It was nearly 11 o'clock, but she answered on the third ring. "Carver? What's wrong?" "There's a fumigation truck at Lorraine's," he said, words tumbling out. "And Thatch is acting strange, like he knows something's wrong. The smell out here." "Hang on," Greer said. He could hear keyboard clicking in the background. "Let me check something." While she searched, Carver returned to the yard. Thatch hadn't moved from his spot by the fence, his body rigid with tension. The chemical smell seemed stronger now, making Carver's eyes water slightly. "Carver?" Greer's voice was tight with concern. "I just checked the county permit database. Lorraine filed for a full-structure fumigation permit for tonight. They're planning to tent the pool house." "Tonight?" His stomach dropped. "But if there are animals inside—" "They'll die," Greer finished grimly. "The chemicals they use for fumigation are lethal to small animals. That's why they require such strict protocols for clearing buildings first." Thatch let out a mournful howl, and Carver remembered how the dog had been trying to rescue Kittens for days. How many more were still trapped in there? "I'm coming over," Greer said. "Don't do anything until I get there." But as Carver stared at the pool house, knowing what was about to happen, waiting felt impossible. He paced the yard, checking his phone every few minutes. The fumigation truck hadn't moved, but he could see shadows moving around it now, workers preparing for the job. Greer's car pulled up 15 minutes later, gravel crunching under her tires as she parked. She hurried around back, still wearing her pajama pants under a hastily thrown-on jacket. "Have they started?" she asked, slightly out of breath. "Not yet, but they're getting ready." Carver pointed to the movement around the truck. "What can we do? We can't just let them—" "We need proof," Greer said firmly. "If we call the police without evidence, it'll be our word against Lorraine's again, and she's got the permit." Thatch barked suddenly, a sharp, urgent sound. They watched as two workers began unloading equipment from the truck. "They'll check the building first, right?" Carver asked. "They have to make sure it's empty?" "They should," Greer said. "But if Lorraine told them it's just storage—" She didn't finish the thought. The chemical smell grew stronger as the workers moved closer to the pool house. Carver's hands clenched into fists. He thought about all those tiny kittens Thatch had rescued, how sick they'd been from whatever was happening in that building. How many more might be trapped inside? "We need to document everything," Greer said, pulling out her phone. "The truck, the workers, the time, everything. If there are animals in there, this becomes criminal negligence." "And if we're wrong?" Carver asked quietly. Greer met his eyes in the darkness. "Then we apologize and look like fools. But if we're right and we do nothing—" A sharp metallic clang cut through the night, the sound of the pool house door being opened. Thatch's whining reached a fever pitch. "We're running out of time," Carver said. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. He'd spent years keeping to himself, avoiding conflict, letting the world pass by. But now lives hung in the balance, and he couldn't look away. Not when he knew the truth. Greer touched his arm, gently. "What do you want to do?" Carver watched as the workers began to prep the building, their flashlight beams dancing across the windows. The chemical smell burned in his nose, a deadly warning of what was to come. Beside him, Thatch continued his desperate vigil, knowing what they all knew. Time was running out for whatever innocent lives were trapped inside that building. The decision crystallized in his mind, clear and unavoidable. They couldn't wait any longer. Whatever the consequences, they had to act now. "Call animal control," he said firmly. "And the police. Tell them everything. The kittens, the chemicals, all of it. I'll try to stall them." "Carver," Greer started, concern in her voice. "I know," he said quietly. "But some things are worth the risk." As Greer pulled out her phone and stepped away to make the calls, Carver looked down at Thatch, who stared back with those knowing amber eyes. Together, they watched the fumigation preparations continue, knowing that the next few minutes would change everything. The chemical smell grew stronger in the night air, and somewhere in the darkness, a tiny mew echoed from the pool house, a sound that turned Carver's worry into absolute certainty. They had to act, and they had to act now. Carver moved with newfound determination, his footsteps purposeful as he strode to his garage. The familiar scent of motor oil and metal welcomed him as he yanked open his heavy toolbox. His hands, usually so steady when working on engines, trembled slightly as he gathered what they might need. "Basic toolkit," he muttered to himself, grabbing his most reliable wrench set. "Bolt cutters for the locks." He added heavy work gloves, his best flashlight, and a handful of clean shop rags. Each item went into an old canvas bag, the weight growing with every addition. Thatch watched from the doorway, his tail low but determined. The dog hadn't stopped trembling since they'd discovered the fumigation truck. "I know, boy," Carver said softly. "We're going to help them." Greer's footsteps approached quickly behind him. "I've got the portable oxygen setup from my truck," she said, holding up a small tank and mask. "It's meant for larger animals, but I can modify it for kittens if we need to." Her voice was steady, professional, but Carver could see the worry in her eyes. "Any word from the authorities?" he asked, zipping up the tool bag. "They're sending units, but it'll take at least 20 minutes. Greer checked her watch. "The fumigators are almost ready to start." Carver nodded, slinging the bag over his shoulder. The weight felt right, grounding him in the moment. "Then we document everything first. Build our case." They moved cautiously along the fence line, staying in the shadows. The night air had grown thick with humidity, and the chemical smell from the fumigation truck seemed to cling to everything. Carver pulled out his phone, making sure the camera was set to night mode. Click. The fumigation truck's license plate. Click. The company name painted on its side. Click. The workers in their protective gear, unloading equipment. Click. The heavy padlocks on the pool house door glinting dully in the security lights. "Look," Greer whispered, pointing to a small vent near the foundation. "There's light coming from inside." Carver zoomed in with his camera. Through the vent slats, a faint glow leaked out. Not the beam of a flashlight, but the steady illumination of permanent lighting. "They've got power running to it. This isn't just storage." A soft, mewing sound drifted through the night air, so faint they might have imagined it. But Thatch's ears perked up instantly, and he let out a low whine. "That's proof," Greer said firmly. "We need to get closer." Carver felt a surge of protectiveness, not just for the animals they knew were inside, but for Greer too, who'd risked her job and reputation to help him. "Stay here with Thatch," he said. "Keep documenting everything. I'll check the windows." "Carver." She touched his arm, concern evident in her voice. "I'll be careful," he promised. "But someone has to look." The yard was well maintained, with freshly mowed grass that muffled his footsteps. Carver moved slowly, staying close to the shadows cast by the large oak trees. His heart pounded with each step, but his hands remained steady. Years of precision work on delicate engines had taught him how to control his movements, even under pressure. The pool house windows were high, designed more for ventilation than views. Carver pulled a small telescoping mirror from his tool bag, the kind he used to check engine components in tight spaces. With careful movements, he extended it upward, angling it to see inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. Rows of small cages lined the walls, stacked 3 high. In the dim light, he could make out movement inside many of them, the shifting of small bodies, the occasional flash of reflected light from tiny eyes. The setup was professional, industrial, a breeding operation hidden in plain sight. He lowered the mirror and stepped back, fighting down a wave of anger. All those months of hearing strange noises, of Thatch's unusual behavior, of Lorraine's defensive reactions. It all made sense now. They weren't just dealing with abandoned kittens. This was a systematic operation. Greer was still filming when he returned to the fence line. "There are dozens of them in there," he said quietly. "All in cages. Some look very young." "Those chemicals will kill them all," Greer said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Even if they're not directly exposed, the fumes, not if we stop it." The words came out with a certainty that surprised even Carver. Since losing his wife, he'd avoided taking stands, preferring to keep to himself. But standing there in the darkness, knowing what was at stake, he felt something long dormant stir to life inside him. He thought of his wife then, how she'd always believed in doing what was right, even when it was hard. How she'd taught him that true strength wasn't in avoiding trouble, but in facing it head-on when necessary. 10 minutes until they start, Greer said, checking her phone. Still no police. Carver squared his shoulders, feeling the weight of his tool bag like armor. Then we buy them time. We document everything, and we make sure they know there are living creatures inside before they start pumping in those chemicals. And if Lorraine shows up? Then she'll have to explain why she's trying to gas dozens of animals to death. His voice was firm, unwavering. Sometimes you have to stand your ground. Greer nodded, her expression matching his resolve. Together then. Thatch pressed against Carver's leg, solid and supportive. The dog that had started all this by trying to save one kitten at a time now stood ready to help save them all. For the first time in years, Carver felt truly alive. Not happy, exactly. The situation was too dire for happiness. But purposeful, connected, like he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done. The chemical smell grew stronger as the workers finished their preparations. Time was running out. But Carver stood his ground, tool bag ready, camera in hand. He wouldn't leave until every animal was safe. No matter what came next, he knew this was right. This wasn't just about kittens anymore. It was about standing up against cruelty, about protecting the vulnerable, about being the person his wife had always believed he could be. And for that, he was ready to face whatever consequences might come. The crunch of gravel shattered the night silence. Carver's heart jumped as headlights swept across the yard, catching him in their glare like a deer frozen in place. He recognized Zeke's massive pickup truck even before it screeched to a halt. Greer whispered urgently from behind the fence, "Carver, get out of there!" But it was too late. Zeke Drummond's bulk emerged from the driver's side, moving with surprising speed for such a large man. Before Carver could retreat, Zeke closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. "Thought you'd be smart enough to mind your own business," Zeke growled. His tattooed forearms flexed as he grabbed Carver's shirt collar. Carver tried to maintain his balance, but Zeke was stronger. With one powerful shove, he sent Carver sprawling onto the damp grass. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs, and his tool bag scattered across the ground. "Stay down if you know what's good for you," Zeke said, standing over him. Light spilled from Lorraine's porch as she emerged, wrapped in an expensive silk robe. Her perfectly styled hair seemed untouched by the late hour, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. She crossed her arms, a satisfied smirk playing across her face. "I warned you about interfering, Carver," she called out. "But you just couldn't help yourself, could you?" Carver pushed himself up onto his elbows, fighting to catch his breath. "There are animals in that pool house," he said, his voice rough but steady. "You can't just..." "Can't what?" Lorraine's laugh was sharp and cold. "Maintain my property? Protect my investment? I have every right to fumigate my buildings." "Not with living creatures inside," Greer's voice rang out from beyond the fence. Lorraine's eyes narrowed. "Trespassing and bringing witnesses? You're in more trouble than you realize, Carver." As if on cue, another car pulled up. Kendrick Stowe stepped out, a thick binder clutched in his hands like a shield. The HOA president approached with the self-important stride of a small-town official drunk on minor power. "This is becoming quite the situation, Mr. Holt," Kendrick said, flipping open his binder. "Section 8, Paragraph 3 clearly states that no resident shall interfere with another resident's property maintenance. Section 12 covers trespassing. Section 15 deals with disturbing the peace after 10 o'clock in the evening." "Those rules weren't written to protect animal abuse," Carver said, finally regaining his feet. His back ached where he'd hit the ground. Kendrick's face reddened. "The rules are the rules. You're looking at thousands of dollars in fines, and that's before we consider criminal charges." "Which reminds me," Lorraine added sweetly, "I've already called animal control about that dangerous dog of yours. They'll be here first thing in the morning to take him away." The threat hit Carver like a physical blow. Thatch had been his only companion since Sarah died, the one constant in his life. He could hear the dog whining anxiously behind the fence, probably held back by Greer. "Thatch has never hurt anyone," Carver protested. "He was trying to save those kittens." "Stealing," Lorraine corrected. "He was stealing my property, and now he's been reported as aggressive. The paperwork's already filed." Zeke took a menacing step closer. "You really want to push this, old man? Because I'm happy to show you what aggressive really looks like." Carver stood his ground, though every instinct screamed at him to retreat. He looked from face to face. Zeke's barely contained violence, Lorraine's cold satisfaction, Kendrick's bureaucratic smugness. They had him surrounded, each wielding their own kind of power against him. "The fumigation starts in 20 minutes, Lorraine announced. "I suggest you clear out before we add more violations to your growing list." "You can't do this," Carver said, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "I already am," Lorraine replied, "and there's nothing you can do about it. Unless you want to lose everything, your dog, your home, maybe even your freedom. Is it worth it?" The question hung in the air like poison. Carver thought of his quiet life, his small business, his home filled with memories of Sarah. He thought of Thatch, loyal and true, who had started all this by trying to do the right thing. "Go home, Mr. Holt," Kendrick said, already writing in his citation book. "You'll receive the formal notices tomorrow. Don't make this worse than it already is." Greer's voice came again from the darkness. "Carver, we have the videos. We can fight this." But Carver could see the reality of his situation clearly now. They held all the official power, Lorraine with her money and connections, Kendrick with his rules and regulations, Zeke with his barely leashed violence. Even with evidence, they could destroy his life before justice had a chance to work. He bent down slowly, collecting his scattered tools. Every movement felt heavy, weighted with defeat. The chemical smell from the pool house seemed stronger now, a reminder of what was at stake and his powerlessness to prevent it. "That's right," Zeke said, watching him with obvious pleasure. "Run along home like a good neighbor." Carver straightened up, his tool bag clutched in white-knuckled hands. He could feel Lorraine's smirk burning into his back as he turned away. Each step toward his own property felt like a betrayal of everything he believed in, everything Sarah had loved about him. Behind the fence, Greer waited with Thatch. The dog pressed against his leg, sensing his distress. "We can't just give up," Greer whispered fiercely. But Carver had no answer for her. He watched as the fumigation crew resumed their work, unrolling heavy tarps in the darkness. Soon those tarps would seal in dozens of innocent lives, and he would have to listen to it happen from the safety of his own home. The weight of his failure pressed down on him like a physical thing. He had tried to stand up for what was right, and the system had shown him exactly how powerless one person's morality could be against the machinery of money and influence. As if to drive the point home, Kendrick called after him. "The animal control officer will arrive at 8 o'clock sharp tomorrow morning. Please have your dog ready for surrender." Carver didn't turn around. He couldn't bear to see their triumphant faces again. Instead, he walked slowly toward his dark house, Thatch padding quietly beside him, Greer's frustrated silence following in his wake. Everything he had tried to prevent was happening anyway, and the cost of his resistance would be extracted in full measure tomorrow. The night pressed in around him, thick with the smell of chemicals and the weight of impossible choices. He had seen the danger clearly, had tried to stop it, and had been thoroughly shown the price of interference. Now all he could do was retreat to his lonely house and wait for morning to take away the last piece of his heart. Carver stood motionless in his darkened backyard, the weight of defeat pressing down on his shoulders. Thatch's warm presence against his leg was both comfort and reminder of what he was about to lose. The chemical smell from Lorraine's property drifted over the fence, making his eyes water. Suddenly, Thatch's ears perked up. The hound lifted his nose to the air, then darted away into the shadows of the yard. Carver watched him disappear, wondering if this was how it would end, his faithful companion making one last attempt to right a wrong before animal control took him away. "Thatch," he called softly. "Come back, boy." A low whine answered him from the direction of the house. Thatch emerged from the darkness, but instead of coming to heel, he paced back and forth, clearly agitated. The dog's behavior was so unusual that Carver forgot his misery for a moment. "What is it?" he asked, taking a step forward. Thatch darted toward the porch, then back to Carver, then to the porch again. His actions were purposeful, urgent. Greer, who had been quietly watching from nearby, moved closer. "He wants to show you something," she whispered. Carver followed as Thatch led them to the old crawlspace access under the porch. The wooden lattice that usually covered it had been pushed aside, creating a dark opening barely large enough for a person to squeeze through. Thatch nosed at Carver's hand, then ducked into the space. "Wait here," Carver told Greer, dropping to his knees. He pulled out his phone and switched on its flashlight before following Thatch into the musty darkness. The beam of light revealed cobwebs and dirt, old paint cans and garden tools long forgotten. But Thatch hadn't stopped there. The dog continued deeper under the house, where the space grew tighter and the air thicker with dust. "Thatch?" Carver called again, his voice muffled in the confined space. A soft sound answered him. Not Thatch's whine, but something higher, more delicate. As Carver crawled forward, his light fell on a sight that made his heart skip a beat. In the furthest corner, curled on an old drop cloth, lay a thin gray cat. Her fur was matted and dull, her frame gaunt despite her swollen belly. And pressed against her, nursing hungrily, were the very kittens Thatch had been bringing home. "Oh my God," Carver breathed. The mother cat's pale green eyes reflected his light, watching him warily. But she didn't run. Perhaps she was too weak, or perhaps she recognized something in him, the same protective instinct that had driven Thatch to rescue her babies. "Greer!" he called out. "I need you in here!" He heard shuffling behind him as Greer navigated the cramped space. When she reached him, her sharp intake of breath told him she understood the significance of what they were seeing. "She's their mother," Greer said softly. Thatch wasn't stealing random kittens, he was bringing them back to her. Carver nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Can you check her over?" Greer inched closer, speaking in soothing tones to the nervous cat. "It's okay, sweet girl. We're here to help." The mother cat allowed Greer's gentle examination, though her eyes never left Carver. Thatch settled beside them, his tail thumping softly against the dirt floor. "She's severely malnourished," Greer reported, "and there are chemical burns on her paw pads, probably from whatever Lorraine's using in that pool house." She ran her hands carefully along the cat's neck. "Wait, there's something here." Greer pulled out her own phone, using its light to examine the cat more closely. "She has a microchip, but..." She frowned, fingers probing the spot. "It feels wrong, like it's been tampered with." "What do you mean?" Carver asked. "The surface is rough, filed down." Greer's voice hardened. "Someone deliberately tried to make it unreadable. That's illegal. It's done by kitten mill operations to hide stolen breeding cats." The truth hit Carver like a physical blow. "The kittens aren't Lorraine's property at all. She stole their mother, used her for breeding, and now she's trying to cover her tracks," Greer finished. "The fumigation isn't for pests. It's to eliminate evidence." Carver thought of the other cats that must still be trapped in Lorraine's pool house, waiting for the poison gas that would silence them forever. His hands clenched into fists. "We need proof," he said. "Something concrete that shows what she's doing." Greer was already pulling out her phone. "I can document the filed chip. And look, these chemical burns match the traces we found on the kittens. Plus, I've got dates and times for all of Thatch's rescues." She snapped several photos of the mother cat and her babies. "It's not much, but it's a start." The mother cat watched them work, her thin body curled protectively around her nursing kittens. Thatch lay beside her, his presence seemingly offering comfort to both mother and babies. The sight stirred something deep in Carver's chest, a familiar ache of protectiveness he hadn't felt since Sarah's passing. "How long has she been here?" he wondered aloud, noting the makeshift nest she'd created from old rags and newspaper. "Probably since before the kittens were born," Greer said. "She must have escaped from Lorraine's operation and found shelter here. Then Thatch discovered her and decided to bring her babies home," Carver finished. He reached out to scratch behind Thatch's ears. "You knew all along, didn't you, boy? You were trying to tell us." Thatch's tail thumped again, his wise amber eyes fixed on Carver with what seemed like expectation. The dog had done his part, bringing the truth to light. Now it was up to Carver to act on it. The chemical smell from next door seemed to grow stronger, a reminder that time was running out. Somewhere in Lorraine's pool house, other cats waited in the dark, unaware of the death sentence about to be carried out. The mother cat's scarred body and filed chip told a story of cruelty that couldn't be ignored. Greer touched his arm gently. "What are we going to do?" Carver looked at the small family huddled in the dirt beneath his porch. The brave mother cat who had escaped her prison to save her babies. The loyal dog who had reunited. Them. The innocent kittens who would have died without intervention. The answer was clear, even if the path forward wasn't. "Whatever we have to," he said quietly. "Whatever it takes to stop this." The mother cat blinked slowly at him, her pale eyes reflecting trust and exhaustion in equal measure. She had fought her way to freedom and found refuge under his porch. Now it was his turn to fight for those who couldn't escape on their own. Carver shifted his weight, bones creaking from crouching in the cramped space beneath his porch. The mother cat's quiet purring mixed with the distant hum of equipment from Lorraine's yard, creating an unsettling contrast that made his skin crawl. "We need to document everything," Greer said, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. She pulled a small medical kit from her pocket and extracted a sterile gauze pad. "I'm going to swab those chemical burns. The residue might help identify what Lorraine's using." The mother cat allowed Greer to gently dab at her injured paws, though her ears flattened slightly at the contact. Thatch pressed closer, offering silent support as Greer worked. "Good girl," Greer murmured, carefully sealing the samples in small evidence bags. She labeled each one with precise notes, her handwriting neat despite the awkward angle. "Now for that chip." She pulled out her phone and opened a specialized veterinary app, then positioned the device's light to clearly show the microchip site. "See how the surface is all rough?" She angled the phone so Carver could see the close-up photos she was taking. "Normal chips are smooth. This was definitely tampered with using a file or similar tool." Carver's stomach twisted as he thought about someone deliberately mutilating a helpless animal to hide their crimes. He pulled out his own phone and opened his photo gallery, finding the images he'd taken earlier of the padlocked pool house door and the fumigation truck's permit number. "I got these before Zeke showed up," he said, turning the screen toward Greer. "The permit's dated for tonight, and those locks weren't there yesterday." Greer nodded grimly. "She's rushing this, probably scared because Thatch exposed her operation." She finished documenting the mother cat's injuries and sat back on her heels. "We need to report this before that fumigation starts." "But to who?" Carver asked, his voice rough with frustration. "Lorraine's got the HOA president in her pocket, and you saw how quick animal control was to believe her story about Thatch." "The police?" Greer suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. "Maybe." Carver ran a hand through his hair. "But she's got connections there too. I've seen squad cars in her driveway during those fancy dinner parties she throws." They sat in tense silence for a moment, the weight of responsibility pressing down on them. The mother cat blinked slowly, her pale eyes seeming to plead for help. One of her kittens mewed softly, and she curled her tail around it protectively. Carver's gaze drifted to the scarred chip beneath her skin, physical proof of the cruelty she'd endured. Something inside him hardened into resolve. "We can't wait for the right person to believe us," he said quietly. "There are animals trapped in that pool house right now." Greer touched his arm. "What are you thinking?" Instead of answering directly, Carver pulled up his phone's keypad and dialed 911. His heart hammered, but his voice remained steady as the dispatcher answered. "Yes, I need to report an emergency at 1732 Oak Grove Lane," he said clearly. "There are live animals locked inside a structure that's about to be fumigated." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker. "Sir, can you verify your location and explain the situation?" "I'm at 1734 Oak Grove Lane, next door to the property in question," Carver continued, forcing himself to stay calm. "I have photographic evidence of padlocked doors on a pool house that's scheduled for fumigation tonight. I have reason to believe there are multiple animals trapped inside." "Are you certain there are animals in the structure?" "Yes," Carver said firmly. "I've documented evidence of an illegal breeding operation, including a stolen breeding cat with a tampered microchip. The fumigation appears to be an attempt to cover up criminal activity." He could hear typing in the background as the dispatcher processed his report. "I'm dispatching units to your location now, sir. Please do not attempt to enter the structure yourself. Can you stay on the line?" Carver looked at Greer, then at the mother cat and her kittens. His gaze drifted toward his fence line, where the chemical smell grew stronger by the minute. "No," he said quietly. "I need both hands free. Please hurry." He ended the call and met Greer's concerned gaze. "They're sending help." "But not fast enough?" she guessed, reading his expression. Carver shook his head. "I can't wait. If that fumigation starts—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I know." Greer squeezed his arm. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay with them," he said, nodding toward the mother cat and her babies. "Keep documenting everything. If things go wrong—" He swallowed hard. "Someone needs to make sure the truth gets out." Greer's eyes shone with tears, but her voice was steady. "Be careful." Carver nodded once, then crawled out from under the porch. He could hear Thatch whining softly behind him, but he didn't look back. The dog had done his part, more than his part, in bringing the truth to light. Now it was Carver's turn to act. The night air felt thick with chemical tang as he moved toward his shed. His hands were steady as he gathered what he needed: heavy work gloves, a bandana to cover his nose and mouth, his strongest flashlight, and his metal toolbox. The weight of the tools felt reassuring against his palm, a familiar comfort in the face of the unknown. As he approached his fence line, Carver could hear the low hum of machinery from Lorraine's yard. The fumigation truck's engine idled, ready to pump poison gas into the sealed structure. Soon, the tenting would begin. His heart pounded against his ribs, but his mind was clear. He thought of the mother cat's scarred body, of Thatch's desperate attempts to save her babies, of the other animals still trapped in darkness. He thought of his late wife, Sarah, who had always said that doing nothing in the face of wrong was the same as doing wrong yourself. Police sirens wailed in the distance, but they sounded too far away. The chemical smell grew stronger. Through the gaps in the fence, Carver could see shadows moving near the fumigation truck. Time had run out. He couldn't wait for others to do what needed to be done. Taking a deep breath, Carver pulled the bandana over his face and gripped his toolbox tightly. The weight of potential arrest and certain retaliation pressed against his shoulders, but he straightened beneath it. Some burdens were worth carrying. The fence boards felt rough under Carver's hands as he eased between them. grateful for the gap Thatch had worn over his nightly missions. The pool house loomed before him, a dark shape against the star-scattered sky. Chemical fumes burned his nose even through the bandana, making his eyes water. Thatch pressed close against his leg, a warm, steady presence in the darkness. The dog's amber eyes reflected determination, as if he understood the gravity of their mission. Together, they crept across Lorraine's manicured lawn, staying in the shadows of her prized rose bushes. The padlock gleamed dully in Carver's flashlight beam. His hands, usually so steady on engine parts, trembled slightly as he pulled his mechanic's pry bar from his toolbox. The metal felt cool and familiar against his palms, grounding him in the moment. "Keep watch, boy," he whispered to Thatch, who immediately turned to face the main house, ears pricked forward. Carver worked quickly, positioning the bar just so. He'd opened enough stuck engine casings to know how to apply pressure without making noise. The lock resisted at first, then gave way with a muffled crack that seemed deafening in the night air. His heart thundered as he eased the broken lock free and set it gently on the ground. The door hinges protested softly as he pulled it open. The chemical smell intensified, burning his throat even through the bandana. He swept his flashlight beam across the pool house interior, revealing shelves of cleaning supplies and pool maintenance equipment. But underneath that sharp chemical tang lurked something else, the unmistakable odor of too many animals kept in too small a space. Thatch nosed past him, padding purposefully toward a stack of plastic storage containers behind several industrial-sized solvent cans. Carver followed, his flashlight beam catching something moving in one of the containers. A tiny paw batted weakly at the air holes, punched in the lid. "Dear God," he breathed, setting down his toolbox and rushing forward. His hands shook as he pried off the first lid. 3 tiny kittens lay huddled together, their sides heaving with labored breaths. They couldn't have been more than 4 weeks old, younger even than the ones Thatch had rescued. Carver gathered them carefully, cradling them against his chest. Their fur was damp with chemical residue, their tiny bodies trembling. He needed to get them out, get them to Greer for treatment. But before he could turn toward the door, Thatch barked sharply, a sound so unexpected in the quiet that Carver nearly dropped the kittens. The hound stood rigid, staring at the back wall of the pool house. His tail pointed straight out, every muscle tense with alertness. Another bark, more insistent this time. "Quiet, boy," Carver hissed, but Thatch wouldn't be silenced. The dog pawed at the wall, then looked back at Carver with an urgency he couldn't ignore. Keeping the rescued kittens secure with one arm, Carver directed his flashlight where Thatch indicated. At first he saw nothing but storage shelves and what looked like an old tarp. Then movement caught his eye, a slight ripple in the heavy fabric. Thatch whined and pawed at the tarp's edge. Carver's throat tightened as he realized what he was seeing. Behind the tarp, partially hidden by empty boxes, stood a large wire cage. In the distance, sirens wailed faintly. Help was coming, but not fast enough. The chemical smell seemed stronger now, seeping through his bandana until each breath burned. But Carver felt a surge of hope as he moved toward the cage. Maybe, just maybe, they could save them all. The kittens against his chest squirmed weakly, reminding him of the precious minutes ticking away. He could hear the fumigation truck's engine idling outside, knew that any moment someone might discover the broken lock. But he couldn't leave, not with more animals trapped inside. His flashlight revealed more kittens in the cage, at least 6 or 7, along with what appeared to be their mother, a sleek Siamese with striking blue eyes. Unlike the other kittens he'd found, these cats looked expensive, bred for show. Evidence of Lorraine's real business, he realized, hidden away from prying eyes. The mother cat hissed weakly as he approached, trying to shield her babies despite her obvious exhaustion. The chemical fumes had affected them all. Their breathing was shallow, their movements lethargic. "It's okay," he murmured, though his own breath came in ragged gasps through the bandana. "We're getting you out of here." The sirens grew slightly louder, but still too distant. Carver felt hope flutter in his chest. If he could just get these animals to safety, if he could just hold out until help arrived, maybe everything would work out. The evidence was here, undeniable. The truth would finally come to light. Thatch pressed against his leg again, offering silent support as Carver balanced his flashlight and began examining the cage's latch. The 3 kittens he'd already rescued mewed softly against his chest, their tiny hearts racing against his own. For a brief, shining moment, standing there in the chemical-laden darkness with his loyal dog beside him and innocent lives in his hands, Carver felt the pure, simple rightness of his choice. Whatever came next, arrest, retaliation, legal battles, he knew with absolute certainty that he was doing what needed to be done. The pool house door exploded inward with a thunderous crash. Zeke Drummond's massive frame filled the doorway, his face contorted with rage in the beam of Carver's fallen flashlight. "You stupid old man," Zeke snarled, advancing like a freight train. "You just couldn't leave well enough alone." Carver barely had time to press the kitten he held closer to his chest before Zeke's fist connected with his jaw. The blow sent him staggering backward, his head ringing. He stumbled against something solid, the kerosene heater used to keep the pool equipment from freezing in winter. Thatch launched himself at Zeke with a deep growl, but the bigger man kicked out, catching the dog in the ribs. Thatch yelped and skidded across the concrete floor. "No!" Carver shouted, trying to keep his feet. The kitten squirmed weakly against him as he struggled to protect it. Zeke grabbed Carver by the throat, lifting him off his feet. "Should have minded your own business," he spat, then slammed Carver backward. The impact knocked the heater over with a metallic clang. Kerosene splashed across the floor, and in the next instant, flames erupted with a whoosh. The fire raced along the spilled fuel, climbing the walls where the fumigation tent hung in heavy folds. Thick, toxic smoke filled the air as the chemicals and tent material caught fire. Carver dropped to his knees, coughing violently. The heat was immediate and intense, turning the pool house into an inferno within seconds. Through streaming eyes, he saw Zeke bolt for the door, leaving him trapped in the burning building. The kitten in his arms mewed pitifully, its tiny body trembling. Carver pulled his shirt up over its face, trying to shield it from the smoke. His lungs burned as he crawled toward where he thought the door might be, but the flames had already cut off that escape route. "Help!" he tried to shout, but the word came out as a weak croak. The smoke was overwhelming now, mixed with the poisonous fumes from burning chemicals and tent material. His vision began to blur at the edges. A shape moved through the flames, Thatch, recovering from the kick. The dog's golden-brown fur was singed, but his amber eyes were fierce with determination. He grabbed Carver's sleeve between his teeth and pulled hard, trying to guide him. Carver could barely see now, could hardly breathe. The kitten had gone still against his chest, though he could feel its heart still beating. He followed Thatch blindly, trusting his dog's instinct as the flames roared around them. Thatch dragged him toward the back of the pool house, where the tent material had torn away from the wall slightly. The dog's powerful jaws ripped at the heavy fabric, creating a larger opening. Fresh air rushed in, carrying with it a familiar voice. "Carver! Oh God, Carver!" Greer screamed from outside. Her hands appeared through the tear, reaching for him. He pushed the kitten through first, making sure Greer had it before trying to squeeze through himself. The synthetic tent material melted and dripped, searing his back as he struggled through the opening. Thatch pressed against his legs, helping to push him out. Greer grabbed his arms, pulling with all her strength. "Come on," she urged, her voice cracking with desperation. Together they managed to get him clear of the building just as the first fire truck arrived, sirens wailing. Firefighters jumped into action, unreeling hoses and shouting commands. Water arced through the air, attacking the flames that had now engulfed the entire pool house. The heat was so intense that Greer and Carver had to scramble backward across the lawn. Carver collapsed onto his back, chest heaving as he gulped in clean air. His throat felt like it was filled with broken glass, and every breath was agony. But his hands instinctively reached for the kitten Greer held. The tiny creature was breathing, shallow, labored breaths, but breathing. Its eyes were closed, its fur matted with soot, but it was alive. Thatch pressed close against Carver's side, his muzzle resting gently on Carver's arm as they watched the firefighters battle the blaze. Greer's hands fluttered over him, checking for serious injuries. "Stay still," she ordered, her voice shaking. "The paramedics are coming. Just stay with me, okay?" Carver couldn't speak, could barely nod. His world had narrowed to the feeling of the kitten's tiny heartbeat against his palm, Thatch's warm presence beside him, and Greer's trembling fingers gripping his free hand. The night air felt blessedly cool on his smoke-scorched skin. Through the chaos of emergency vehicles and shouting voices, he heard Lorraine's shrill accusations, Zeke's angry protests. But they seemed distant, unimportant. What mattered was the precious life he'd managed to save, and the loyal dog who had saved them both. His vision began to fade as exhaustion and smoke inhalation took their toll. The last thing he saw before consciousness slipped away was Thatch's concerned face hovering over him, the dog's amber eyes reflecting the flashing red and blue lights of the emergency vehicles. In that moment, despite his injuries and the destruction around them, Carver felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The truth would come out now. The innocent would be protected. Sometimes, he realized, doing the right thing meant walking through fire. But you didn't have to walk alone. Carver's eyes fluttered open to the gentle hum of medical equipment. The familiar scent of antiseptic mingled with the warmer, earthy smell of animals. He was lying on a padded examination table in Greer's clinic, soft blankets tucked around him. His throat felt raw, and his chest ached with each breath. But what caught his attention were the sounds, tiny mews and purrs coming from nearby. Turning his head carefully, he saw a large kennel filled with the rescued kittens, all clean and wrapped in warm towels. "Welcome back," Greer said softly, appearing at his side. Her copper-blonde hair was pulled back messily, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. But she smiled. "You gave us quite a scare." "The kittens?" His voice came out as a rasp. "All alive, thanks to you." She adjusted his oxygen mask. "Even the little one you pulled out last. We're calling her Hope. She's a fighter, just like her rescuer." Movement caught his eye, and he saw the gray mother cat stretched out on a blanket nearby. Her thin body was curled protectively around 3 of her smallest kittens, but her pale green eyes were fixed on Carver. The quiet purr rumbling from her throat grew louder when their gazes met. "She hasn't left your side since we brought you in," Greer explained, checking his vital signs. "It's like she knows what you risked to save her babies." Carver tried to sit up, but Greer gently pressed him back. "Easy there. The paramedics wanted you at the hospital, but I convinced them I could monitor you here. You inhaled a lot of smoke." Through the clinic's windows, he could see police cars' lights still flashing in the pre-dawn darkness. 2 officers stood talking to a fire inspector near the charred remains of Lorraine's pool house. "They found everything," Greer said, following his gaze. The locked cages, chemical accelerants, documentation of the illegal breeding operation. The firefighters said the whole place was rigged to burn. Zeke knew exactly what he was doing when he knocked you into that heater. She perched on the edge of his exam table, her hand finding his. Lorraine and Zeke are both in custody. The fire chief confirmed it was attempted murder, given how they trapped you inside. Thatch woofed softly from his position by the door, where he stood guard. His fur was singed in places, but he held his head high, proud of his role in the rescue. "Your dog's a hero," Greer said. "The police want to recommend him for one of those animal bravery awards, though I think he's more interested in the treats the officers keep sneaking him." A weak smile crossed Carver's face. 5 years ago, after losing his wife, he'd withdrawn from everything and everyone. He'd found comfort in the simple routine of fixing engines, in Thatch's quiet companionship. He never expected to find purpose again in the midst of chaos and flame. "You know," Greer continued, her voice gentle, "sometimes the bravest thing isn't charging into a burning building. Sometimes it's opening your heart again after loss." She squeezed his hand. "These past few days, watching you fight for these innocent creatures, it's reminded everyone what real courage looks like." The gray mother cat stood carefully, leaving her sleeping kittens. She padded over to Carver's table and jumped up with surprising grace. Finding a spot near his chest, she settled down, her purr deepening as she pressed against him. "I think you've been adopted," Greer said with a soft laugh. Carver's free hand found the cat's fur, feeling the steady vibration of her contentment. Each breath still hurt, but the pain seemed less important now. The weight of his self-imposed isolation began to lift, replaced by something warmer: connection, purpose, maybe even hope. Through the window, he watched the sky lighten with the first hints of dawn. The police continued gathering evidence, documenting every detail of Lorraine's cruel operation. But here in the clinic's quiet warmth, surrounded by the lives he'd helped save, Carver felt an unfamiliar peace settle over him. Greer stayed beside him, her presence as steady and healing as the morning light. Perhaps this was what redemption felt like, not a single dramatic moment, but the slow awakening of a heart long dormant, brought back to life by simple acts of compassion and courage. As morning broke fully over the town, the true scope of Lorraine Kincaid's operation came to light. Detective Sarah Chen stood in Carver's clinic, flipping through pages of evidence on her tablet. "The raid on her house uncovered everything," she told Carver and Greer. "Financial records showing illegal breeding sales, forged papers, even receipts for chemical agents used to keep the animals quiet during inspections." Carver watched through the window as officers led Lorraine out of her house in handcuffs. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, her designer clothes replaced by the reality of her crimes. Behind her, Zeke Drummond was escorted to a separate patrol car, his face dark with fury. "We've got them both," Detective Chen continued. "Lorraine's facing multiple counts of animal cruelty and fraud. Zeke's charges are even more serious: assault with intent and attempted murder through arson. The fire marshal's report confirmed he deliberately knocked you into that heater." But the biggest surprise came when tech forensics searched Kendrick Stowe's email server. Messages between him and Lorraine revealed a pattern of corruption spanning years. "Found this gem from last night," Chen said, reading from her screen. "Handle the situation immediately. If those animals are found, we'll all face questions we can't answer. Signed by your HOA president himself." Animal Control Officer Martinez arrived later that morning, carrying official documentation clearing both Carver and Thatch of any wrongdoing. He knelt to scratch Thatch's ears. "This old boy wasn't stealing kittens. He was saving them. We're recommending him for our department's Animal Hero Award." The small group who had wielded so much power over their quiet neighborhood were exposed for what they truly were. Their carefully constructed facade of respectability crumbled in the face of undeniable evidence and simple decency. In the days that followed, Carver's once quiet home transformed into a haven of new life. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the hardwood floors where tiny paws now pattered in playful chase. The gray mother cat, finally feeling secure, had claimed the worn armchair by the window as her throne. Her green eyes would follow her kitten's antics with contentment, no longer haunted by fear. Thatch lay sprawled beside Carver's recliner, his tail thumping gently whenever the smallest kitten, the one they'd pulled from the fire, wobbled past. The old hound had become a surrogate guardian, watching over his adopted family with gentle patience. Every morning, like clockwork, Greer's truck would rumble up the gravel drive. She'd bring fresh supplies and her veterinary expertise, but more than that, she brought a warmth that filled the house's empty corners. Together they'd sit at the kitchen table, mugs of coffee growing cold as they tended to the tiniest survivor. "Look at this little fighter," Greer would say, cradling the kitten while checking its breathing. Her smile, when she caught Carver's eye, held something that made his heart stir in ways he'd almost forgotten. Their conversations stretched longer each day, moving beyond care instructions to shared stories and quiet dreams. Sometimes they'd just sit in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the walls gold while kittens tumbled around their feet. In those moments, Carver felt the walls he'd built around his heart slowly crumbling, replaced by something warmer and braver than solitude. Weeks passed like pages turning in a gentle breeze. On a bright Saturday morning, the neighborhood gathered on Carver's front lawn, where red and gold balloons bobbed in the autumn air. The local fire chief stood at attention, holding a gleaming service medal for Thatch. "For exceptional bravery and service to the community," the chief announced, his voice carrying across the crowd. Camera flashes sparkled like morning dew as he bent down to secure the medal to Thatch's collar. The old hound sat perfectly still, amber eyes wise and calm, as if understanding the significance of the moment. But Carver barely noticed the cameras or the crowd's applause. His attention was fixed on the remarkable scene at his feet. 10 healthy kittens playing in the grass, their fur glossy and their eyes bright with life. The gray mother cat sat regally nearby, her scarred but healing body a testament to survival. Thatch would occasionally glance at his charges, his tail wagging with quiet pride. Greer stood close to Carver, her presence steady and warm. When she slipped her hand into his, their fingers intertwined naturally, like pieces finding their proper place. The simple gesture spoke volumes, of trust rebuilt, of hearts healing, of future possibilities. Standing there, Carver felt none of the discomfort he'd once felt in crowds. The neighbors who had doubted him now saw clearly, not a reclusive mechanic, but a man who had chosen decency when faced with wrong. He hadn't set out to be a hero. He'd simply refused to look away when others suffered. The medal caught the sunlight, throwing tiny sparkles across Thatch's fur. But the real reward was here, in this circle of renewed life and trust, in the soft pressure of Greer's hand in his, in the contented purr of the mother cat, in the playful tumble of kittens, and in the steady presence of his faithful hound. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.